In this video, we're going to ask a seemingly simple question. Who is Aboriginal? That is, how is Aboriginality understood and defined in Australia? It sounds like an easy question, but it's a topic that sparks much discussion and has become, at times, contentious. For example, most of us would agree that the people shown on screen are Aboriginal Australians. Their Aboriginality is clearly evident. But what about a person like this man, with white skin and red hair, who also identifies as Aboriginal, as does the lady shown on screen, as reported by the ABC in 2018? I'll get to all that soon. My great-grandparents were Danish. Actually, I believe my grandmother was Danish, but lived most of her life in Australia. Does that make me a Dane? I don't live in Denmark. I don't speak Danish. Actually, I've never ever been there, but I have Danish blood. However, I don't think anybody would classify me as being Danish. That said, if I learnt the language and found a job in Denmark and lived and worked there and followed their customs and traditions, I'd say people would readily accept me because I look like a Dane. Danish and Australian culture is not too dissimilar. I'd say with a bit of language training, I'd fit right in. However, you couldn't say the same thing about me and China. I have a Chinese wife. I speak Chinese, perhaps not very well, but certainly enough to get by. I've lived and worked in China. Does that make me Chinese? Not at all. Even if I spoke perfect Chinese and knew everything there is to know about Chinese culture and traditions, Chinese people would simply never accept me as being Chinese because I don't look Chinese. Sure, they'd be nice to me, but having lived in China myself, I know appearances are very important. You can't be Chinese unless you look Chinese. It might sound harsh, but that's the reality. But when it comes to Aboriginality, it seems the China test is ignored to some extent. That is, you can't be Aboriginal unless you look Aboriginal is simply not true in modern-day Australia, as demonstrated by this ABC article from 2017, thanks to a viewer for sending this in. White skin and red hair doesn't mean I'm not a proud Aboriginal man. This stands in stark contrast to my experience in China or Japan, where appearance was a dominant factor in identity. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it does lead into my next point. The thing is, in Australia, Aboriginality matters, in that Aboriginal Australians are entitled to more support and services than non-Aboriginal people. For example, the Closing the Gap Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme co-payment. Services Australia states, the Closing the Gap PBS co-payment reduces the cost of PBS medicines. Eligible patients can get their medicine at the concession price. Or, if they have a concession or healthcare card, their medicine is free. Obviously, non-Aboriginal people, no matter how poor, do not have access to this same program. Another example is Abstudy. According to Services Australia, Abstudy provides financial help for Australian Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander students or apprentices. It can help with things such as school fees and boarding fees. Look, I'm happy young people are getting an opportunity to get an education, but unfortunately, this program has resulted in societal unfairness. For example, it also pays for travel costs to get to and from school. Last month, June 2025, news.com.au reported, children in remote communities denied seats on near-empty Indigenous-only charter flights. Essentially, a father in remote Queensland said his non-Indigenous sons were denied seats on taxpayer-funded near-empty charter flights designated for Abstudy recipients, even though he was willing to pay. Due to recent flooding, the roads were cut off and flying was the only option in or out. Basically, the students were all from families living in the same town. They all attend the same school, but being treated differently because of their Aboriginality, or lack thereof. As it is a requirement to receive certain support and services, what is the legal definition of Aboriginality in Australia? According to the Australian Law Reform Commission, on their page Legal Definitions of Aboriginality, under the three-part definition, they write, An Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander is a person of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent who identifies as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander and is accepted as such by the community in which he or she lives. So as long as you can trace your descent back to an Aboriginal person, no matter how many generations, you are considered as Aboriginal, as long as you wish to be identified as such, and as long as your community accepts you as such, which obviously can be a contentious issue. For example, in the United States, depending on the Native American tribe, there is something known as blood quantum. The Navajo Nation, for instance, has strict identity requirements. According to the Navajo Office of Vital Records and Identification, under Navajo blood requirement, they state, "The Navajo Nation requires at least one biological parent to be enrolled with the Navajo Nation. The applicant must meet the minimum 1/4 Navajo blood requirement." Essentially, this means that one of your 4 grandparents must be considered full-blood Navajo, or alternatively, if you had 2 grandparents who were half Navajo each. Of course, these blood requirements set up some rather controversial social issues regarding finding a partner. For example, if I'm 1/4 Navajo and I wish to have Navajo children, I must seek out a partner who is at least 1/4 Navajo blood. If I don't, I've destroyed my Navajo lineage. Other groups, such as the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, have an even stricter blood quantum requirement of 1/2 or more. Having a single full-blooded grandparent is simply not enough. Just to be clear, I'm not saying what's right or wrong here, but as we've seen, in Australia, where Aboriginality is officially defined by descent, self-identification and community acceptance, and not purely by appearance or a strict blood quantum, then suddenly the question, who is Aboriginal, is no longer a trivial matter. It is, in fact, a deeply complex issue with significant real-world, government-enforced consequences.